Algorithms are part of our everyday life, and they help us get more of what we want, right? Well, in Kyle Chayka's new book, he argues that this has flattened culture, making the popular things more popular and the obscure things more obscure. I read his book Filterworld during my iPod experiment month. I was feeling frustrated with Spotify's algorithm and decided to listen to music exclusively through an iPod for a month. I loved Kyle's book so much that I had to reach out to him to talk more about it. A clip of this interview appeared in the first video of this iPod month series on Digging the Greats, but today I'm bringing you our full conversation. I loved getting to talk to Kyle, and especially loved his book as it hit the nail on the head. So here's my full conversation with Kyle Chayka, author of Filterworld: How Algorithms Flattened Culture. With your book, like, the internet has simultaneously made the world bigger and also smaller. So like in early pre-algorithm days of the internet, that's enabling people who wouldn't normally be able to connect over long distances. Now we can. And that's a very good thing. And I think the democratization of making stuff is a very good thing too, with computers and with, especially in music, like with music production. But how do you hold the balance between that and where we are now? Like, how do you define culture stuff versus lowercase c content? And how do you see them overlapping?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean,
Yeah.
I think all of the issues I talk about in the book and all of the issues with the internet are kind of double-sided or double-edged. Like, there are always good sides and there are always bad sides. I feel like my problem lately in the past few years is the bad side has seemed to overwhelm the good side. So with this question of accessibility, or like the democratic publishing of stuff, the good news is that everyone can put things out there. You can upload your song on Spotify, you can put your video on YouTube, you can film yourself on TikTok, and you can find an audience.
Yeah.
Like, there are people out there who can watch you without you having to get put on TV by like an MTV executive. And that's really cool. But I think now so much attention is mediated by algorithmic feeds that you have to cultivate the attention of the feeds in order to get that audience. And even if you have that audience already, you now have to contend with the feed, which is essentially trying to like block your audience from you and control who sees you. So that you can put things out there, but that's not a guarantee they'll get seen by anyone. And they don't get seen equitably, let's say. Like on the open internet in the earliest days, you put a website online, anyone could just go to that URL and see the site, and they're more or less as likely to find your site as any other random site. But now, I mean, there's so many variables to calculate, which include like, how many followers have you already gotten? How optimized is your page or your account? Who do you know? What relationships do you have? So I think there's still a lot of inequity in how things get distributed.
Yeah. And I'll say, for me as someone who makes stuff on YouTube, like, that is a definite game to have to play. And I do enjoy getting to talk about deeper cut stuff, but I have to dress it up as something else so that you'll click on it. So that you'll be like, oh, let me find out about this thing. And then along the way, I'll take you on a journey to get to whatever deep cut thing you didn't know about, but I have to dress it up as something else. Which
the content has to be optimized in a way. Like, particularly on a platform like YouTube, you have to dress it up with a good thumbnail. You have to give it a good title. You have to shape the subject that you're talking about so that it appeals to people. And then you can kind of hide or shoehorn in the thing that you truly deeply want to talk about.
Exactly.
I think there's this pressure to conform to the standards of the platform and just to make the thing that is meant to attract the most attention. Like, I deal with that all the time as a journalist. Like, you want the headline to be grabby. You want the idea to be provocative, even if in the text of the article, you are making different arguments and have a more subtle idea than what's in the headline.
Yeah, it's a difficult balance. And then, I mean, I don't know how deep we need to get into this, but with Google stuff too, like SEO and all of that, obviously that plays into not even just music and culture, but information. And now with the AI, Google AI stuff, that has me really thinking about like the stuff that I see and why I'm seeing it and how I see it, and especially AI overviews, and can I trust what they're summarizing on the thing? So yeah.
Yeah, we're in a new era. When I wrote Filterworld, it was mostly like 2021 through 2020, early 2020. Sorry. It was mostly from 2021 to like late 2022, I think.
Yeah.
And that was kind of just before we entered this AI era when ChatGPT got released to the public. And I mean, all the problems we had with algorithmic feeds and like platforms are multiplied 100x when we just have AI generating summaries of what we're doing.
Yes.
Like I was watching the Google presentation the other day, and it showed someone using AI to search within a YouTube video. So to ask a question of a YouTube video so that they didn't have to watch the YouTube video. And it's like, okay, great. Sure, you can get an answer in text, but like that is literally going to destroy the entire ecosystem of user-generated content. So what comes after that?
Yeah. These are the questions. Let me ask you about friction. So you talk about in the book the old way of consuming culture and it being full of friction. So like you having to record an episode of a Super Mario cartoon on VHS at the right time, something I'm very familiar with. And then that is the most valuable tape in the world now. So scarcity plays into this. And I think because of the non-ubiquity of music and other media back then, we had to choose more carefully the things that we're consuming. And now there's so many things. It's like the paralysis of choice. So is there a threshold of requirements for art or media to stand out as culture above the waves of just endless content?
Yeah. I mean, it's like every new thing is now competing with the entirety of culture that has existed before it. So it's like on Spotify, you can either listen to a new track from some new artist, or you can listen to literally any other song that has ever existed and is licensed. And so that there's no friction between like going to one song versus another. It's just as easy to look for the Bruce Springsteen track as it is to like look up a new musician. And I think data has proven out that people are listening to old music more now because of Spotify and because it's just easy to access and gets recommended. So I think in order to keep your attention and like attract you enough, a new piece of culture has to overcome that competition from everything else. And so it seems to privilege the things that are the most attention grabbing and the most like addictive in a way. Like it makes me think of the new Sabrina Carpenter song Espresso, which is the most, on one hand, the most vapid pop song to ever exist. On the other, it's like extremely, extremely catchy, and you will listen to it over and over again. And so that's like a song that you would seek out and keep listening to. Like the culture, new culture now has to be habit forming, and like it has to drive you to it, because if it doesn't drive you to it, then you're just going to find something else really easily.
Like it has to be either super addictive if it's new, or some sort of established, like a Marvel franchise of whatever the content is that you're like, oh, I know what this is. I'll just go ahead and put this on.
Is that like the new Taylor Swift albums? Where it's like you want to tune in to the sequel to the last
Yeah.
movie or album or whatever. You are following the storyline and affirming your fandom by continuing to consume it. And
Yeah.
that's what drives you. I think that's kind of an artist platform, like your
Yeah.
pre-existing body of work, your pre-existing footprint online
Yeah.
makes it easier to attract and keep new audiences. Like, I think a law of Filterworld that I describe in the book is like what's already popular gets more and more popular, and what is
Yes.
already obscure gets more and more obscure. And that's a really hard thing to shift. Like, it's hard to
Yeah.
get in the viral zone if you're not already there. And if
Yeah.
you're already
Definitely.
there, then it's really easy. Like, every new thing you put out just goes crazy.
Right. And the bar is lower, I guess. Yeah. And it's just because you figured out like your formula, and then you just
Mm-hmm.
rinse and repeat. Yeah.
Totally. Like, formulaic. I think culture is more formulaic online, or at least the formulas are
Yeah.
more blatant,
Yeah.
because once you figure out something that works, you have no incentive to change it, at least until the algorithm changes, right? Like, I think
Right.
of
Right.
Instagram's shift from still images to videos. Like,
Yeah.
for many many years, people who were good at photography did really well on Instagram, and that's how they built their accounts and figured things out. And then all of a sudden, Instagram decided that no, you have to post videos instead, and that's a
Right.
different skill set. That's a
Totally.
Talking on camera is not the same thing as just posting photos. And
Yeah.
so that really, the change in the feed or the change in the platform caused a change in culture, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and the emphasis on short form stuff too, because I'm on YouTube, and like most of my videos will be like around 15 or so minutes, or up from there. So the emphasis with YouTube, even on shorts, it is, I can take 15 minutes and like take you on a journey, and like I'm confident in my ability to do that. But when it comes to making a 15-second thing, it's like so much harder because it is a completely different skill set. I'm like, oh, I don't know how to boil down all of this into this little thing, but that is what is being pushed out.
Yeah, like, if they're prioritizing the super short video, then you have an incentive to create this super short video,
Yeah,
regardless of if that's what suits your content or
yeah,
not.
yeah,
And I think all the time about how Spotify, when it's auto playing, when it's
yeah,
recommending you stuff, it almost never plays long songs. Like,
yeah,
I don't think this is just me, but it will never play a song that's over 3 or 4 minutes at most.
yeah,
And so I think it's doing that because it knows that if it plays a long song, you're more likely to skip it. So it's just
yeah,
like feeding you a short, kind of ignorable thing and then moving on to the next one.
yeah,
So it really, like, privileges a certain kind of content and deprioritizes a different kind.
yeah.
And, like, a long song is not a bad thing.
Right, right.
Like,
Yeah,
music has been long for a long time, and
yeah,
so I feel like it pushes consumers towards certain types of or forms of culture that they don't, maybe, that organically they might not always enjoy. Like,
yeah,
if you ask any person, would you rather have a playlist of 23-minute songs or a mixture of lengths that range from 2 minutes to 6 minutes? I think they'll choose the latter. Like, no one
yeah,
wants
yeah,
that. No one embraces that uniformity
yeah.
of their own volition.
Yeah, and you also say in the book about how the algorithms, like at first, it'll be sort of attuned to more of what you are accustomed to liking, and what you're responding to, and then eventually it sort of just gives everyone the similar stuff, and there will be some stuff that just, the illusion is, oh, this is custom attuned to you, and so you're more receptive to it, but uh, it's not necessarily actually that, and it's just a mass market thing. I've seen that in the pandemic. I did brief stint working at a microphone company, and I would sit there and work on microphones all day. And it was me and one other person, and it was just us working on microphones. And so we're like, hey, let's play some music. And it didn't matter if it was my Spotify or his Spotify. If I hit play, whatever album, whatever playlist, eventually we would end up, because we were sitting there for hours, eventually we'd end up, no matter where we started and which account we started on, we'd end up hearing the same songs. Which was so like, crazy. Okay, what are we doing then? I don't understand. What's the point of this? Yeah.
Right. It eventually, I think algorithmic feeds eventually route you toward the lowest common denominator. Yeah. So if Spotify is playing for long enough, eventually it's going to get so conservative and so safe that it's just like the thing that everyone is okay with, or the thing that works the best for your category of user. So it might not be the same for everyone, but I mean, I think it almost becomes a weird form of astroturfing popularity, because there are certain artists who are new often, or relatively new, who all of a sudden just get recommended all the time on Spotify. Yeah. And I think, I don't know. I mean, my wife falls into this trap more often than I do for some reason, maybe because she listens to more Taylor Swift, but it's like, it will move her, a millennial white woman, from Taylor Swift to like Big Thief, or which she does not like, or Phoebe Bridgers, which she also does not like, or now it's Chappell Roan, who's like the new pop star in this vein.
Yeah.
And she's like, no, I don't, like, even though I fit this demographic, I'm not into this stuff. Right. But it just keeps going back to that. It's like, no, you will, I'm going to expose you to this until you like it.
Yeah. Yeah, like, exactly.
It's very strange.
So along with that, you talk about in the book the rise of ambient culture and stuff that can be ignored because it doesn't have much individual significance. Because there's also always just more of it to be consumed. So the classic example is in music, lo-fi, chill hop beats to study to. So do you see a place for that kind of culture stuff, ambient culture, background stuff? And I know that is being promoted in so many ways, but do you think there is a place for that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I love ambient content. like I definitely am critical of it in the book, but I think there's a great role for it in your life. Like, I think background music is good. I think Brian Eno, who coins the phrase ambient music, his original definition was something that's as ignorable as it is interesting. So you can either ignore it, or you can pay attention to it, and it rewards attention. I think a lot of the stuff today does not reward attention, basically. Like, it's just background.
It's just ignorable, yeah.
Yeah, like the lo-fi chill hip-hop beats, if you focus in on it, it's not that good. Like, and every song is more or less the same as every other song. It's very mediocre on purpose. Whereas if you listen to like Brian Eno's music for airports or something, it's like an artistic work that is aesthetically challenging and innovative, even though it sounds simple. But I think ambient describes a lot of stuff, not just music. Like, I've talked about it in the context of television a lot. Yes. Like Emily in Paris on Netflix, and now the latest season of Bridgerton has been getting a lot of the same descriptions, where Bridgerton is this, anachronistic period drama romance ensemble show. Yeah. And it's so simple and so superficial that it's like brightly colored and fun to look at. It moves really slowly, and it's just totally ambient content. Like, it's something you can experience while you look at your phone. And I think that's another incentive for culture now, is to be able, like Brian Eno's, like, it can be as ignorable as is interesting. So you have to be able to ignore something for like 5 or 10 minutes while you look at your phone or send a text, and then tune back in and not be alienated from it. Yeah. So it's like, has to be kind of simple, it has to be slow, it has to be not ambiguous or complicated, which I think is the problem with ambient content for me, is when too many things are ambient. Like if everything has to be ambient, that's terrible for culture.
Yes.
And that's what is prioritized right now. So if everything moves toward being ambient, then we're going to be real bored real fast.
Yeah. Because that is what plays well on algorithmic platforms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Let me ask you about taste. So you talk about the importance of taste, which requires things like being deeply felt, time to engage with it, and surprise, which all are counter to the goals of an algorithm. So what can people do to practice developing your own taste surrounded by all of these algorithmic platforms?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something I'm still thinking through. Like it was a question that came up in the book, and now it's really, I'm still, it's like an obsession, I think.
Yeah.
But so if an algorithmic feed promises to deliver you what you like, and it promises this like personalized experience, but doesn't deliver it, you have to think about what is actually personal. Like I think taste is a kind of labor also. Like it's something you have to put work into, cultivate intentionally, like spend your time on. It's something you have to kind of commit to in a way. So I think how you can do that is, I mean, it can be as simple as thinking about how something makes you feel. like you can sit with a piece of music and just think about it, and think about what the artist's intention was, and think about what the song means, and just kind of digest it and pay deep attention to it in a way that the algorithmic feed doesn't necessarily want you to. I think you can do your own research in culture, like better to do that in culture than in like pandemic disease stuff. Like if you do your own work and do some digging to know like who an artist is, what they wanted to say, what their background is, like what the context of that creation is, then you're going to appreciate it more and understand it more. And not just like let it wash over you and drift away and not mean anything. And I think then what comes after that is just cultivating something like a collection or a library or an organization of things that you like. To cultivate your personal taste, you have to know what it is and kind of like construct it for yourself. So to me, that could be, it could be a library of books. It could be an art collection. It could also be playlists on Spotify.
Could be an iPod.
It could be an iPod. Yeah. Like one problem I have with all of these platforms is that they change so much. And so when something changes, you lose your collection. You lose your access to the culture that you've gathered. And so the best ways to maintain your collection is to have like the iPod where it's just static and you are the one controlling it. In the same way, I mean, you can collect vinyl, you can buy books, you can, ensuring that you have access to things in the same way now that you might in a decade or 2 decades. That's really important. And it's something we took for granted. Like with a CD, you can still play a CD. But how Spotify works today is going to be entirely different than how it works in 5 or 10 years, if it even exists. So,
and there's so many. I used this differently than I do now with Spotify. Like, because this back in the day, this is like, I'm going to take my stuff and put it in here, and now with this, it's like, because you have access to everything, I don't know, it feels like I can just access it whenever. I don't even need to save it. And then you're right. Like if stuff gets removed, if stuff changes, if they just, if they add more, ironically, if they add more friction in their process to get to the stuff that you want, But like if it's on here, there's friction to get it. But then if I got it on here, I'm good.
Yeah.
If on Spotify, if I have access to the thing and then they're adding friction with algorithms or with they're pushing video stuff or audiobooks or any of that, then yeah, the stuff that I love and take for granted is now harder to get to, and then more likely to forget about.
Yeah. I find that so depressing, or like it's very bleak to me that, you know, Spotify can change how you access the music you love whenever it wants. And now you see how Spotify is adding more and more features that are about audiobooks or like podcasts or listening to recommended playlists rather than playing albums. And fundamentally, you are not in control of how you experience the stuff on there. Whereas at least on an iPod, you are like, it's difficult to use at this point. You can't just like type in, use voice commands or type in your thing. But I think the work you put in to overcome that lends meaning to the culture that you experience. And it just ensures that you will be able to have the same experience in the future. Plus, like, I mean, music, any kind of culture is formed by its distribution mechanism and where it exists, you know, like musicians wrote songs to fit on one side of a vinyl record or whatever, or one side of a tape. And in the same way, music is now being designed for Spotify, like the huge Drake mixtapes or like Taylor Swift's every album is a double album. And so by having the iPod or the vinyl record or whatever, you're also preserving like the context of how that music was meant to exist in a way. Like, things don't make the same sense on Spotify that they do on a vinyl album, and vice versa. You know, like I think an important point of culture is that like a piece of art is made to exist in a certain form by the artist, and when you remove it from that, you are changing the meaning, and that can be, that's fine. That's not like a crime. But when we want to appreciate how something originally existed, we should experience it in the form that it existed in, hopefully.
Yeah, and the form of, I don't think that Spotify or streaming music is inherently bad, but what it has become is it just dilutes everything, meaning-wise, and because also, it's just an endless stream, like turning on a faucet, and you can just at any time go, actually, I'm going to go to this song. So you do lose some of that.
The scarcity is important too. Like on the iPod, you can only listen to so many songs, and it's a lot of songs. Like, does anyone really need more than like 100 albums in their pocket? Like I certainly don't listen to more than 100 albums usually on Spotify anyway. So for my listening habits, like I should just have them in a static form, you know? I want to keep engaging with those things that I love and not have them kind of taken away. It's bad for discovery. Like an iPod is not going to send you something new because it's static. Like it's up to you what's on there. But I mean, so I'm ranting a little bit, but like,
no, go for it.
Like a huge problem with algorithmic feeds is discovery. So recommendations were supposed to help you discover new stuff. And they do. Like the YouTube algorithm sends you cool new stuff. Spotify can send you a new thing. TikTok certainly has for me, like introduced me to new things. But what matters is what you do with it after that. Like you have to take the next step and like download something or follow someone or subscribe to someone's newsletter or whatever to ensure that you keep getting that and to ensure that the creator of that can keep doing it.
Well, let me ask you broader than music, because you're talking about, you're sort of alluding to this now, and you mentioned in the book about the idea of the medium as the message. And so now with platforms across the internet, basically building higher and higher walls. Like Facebook discourages linking out, Twitter, X now also discourages linking out in a way that a decade ago or more, that was a primary like promotional thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Same thing with Instagram. Like very few people are clicking the link in the bio because that is such a big ask to leave the platform, and then the platform is disincentivized to get people to leave. So what do you think that does, these platforms building higher and higher walls does to culture in general?
Oh man, I mean, it lends the lie to that idea that the internet was meant that everyone could distribute everything. like as you were describing, the early days of social media and these platforms were all about broadcasting to an audience and connecting with followers or fans or whatever. And now it's clear that the point was never allowing you to gather an audience, but instead accumulating an audience to the platform itself. So when the walls are so high on these platforms, an artist can develop an audience there, but then can't get them off. And then the platform controls what you do and how you reach that audience. So, I mean, like my own personal example of this is like Twitter was huge for my career as a journalist, for connecting with people and promoting my work. I'm sure hundreds of thousands of people who never would have seen my articles saw them because of Twitter.
Yeah.
And now that linking out is discouraged and not promoted, and literally Substack links for newsletters are almost muted, that completely blocks me from delivering my content to an audience and finding new audiences. So it just totally destroys the purpose that I had for the platform. And I think that's happening, as you're saying, in a lot of places. Like Instagram is definitely doing that. TikTok makes it really hard to get outside of the platform. Even something like Substack for newsletters is like, they're increasingly trying to like build a zone that you stay within
Substack.
Yeah, I mean, Substack is building social network functionality and kind of helping people stay within an ecosystem, even if I, the user, want to drive them out of it. So it's like,
I love near the end of the book, you do the algorithmic cleanse, and you're basically several months without algorithms. And I'm doing my own version of that with this iPod for a month. So you talk about the importance of human curation and the DJs and the experience of like hearing a radio show and then understanding the intentionality behind how it's constructed and the connection between songs and all of that. So how do you balance listening to stuff that you love listening to and stuff that you don't necessarily like but is interesting or provokes you? Because I love that idea that like it's not necessarily, you're not supposed to like everything. It can poke you and prod at you and be interesting without you necessarily loving it or it becoming a big thing. So how do you seek those kinds of things out?
It's a really good question, because it's so easy to just listen to what we already like or follow what we already like. The balance, I mean, for me, the balance comes from those like human curators who are doing the work of organizing culture for me. Like, I don't know enough about music to know what to look out for. I only know like what reaches me. So when I'm listening to someone's DJ set or like a radio show, and I know that they've like curated this really interesting mix of music, I'm much more likely to sit with the songs and be patient and not just skip to the next thing. I mean, often you can't, because like a radio show is live. And so you're just along for the experience. I don't know. I think, you have to get outside your comfort zone in one way or another. So that could come from listening to someone else's curation, like a DJ. It could also come from just seeking out different sources of that culture. Like for me in the book, I recounted how I joined Adagio, which is a streaming service that's only for classical music. It's like Spotify for classical music.
Yeah.
And I don't know anything about classical music, really. I know like a few composers who I like a little bit. But even just being on that platform and essentially wandering around gave me a really interesting look at what exists in classical music. And like, I listened to some Debussy and Satie and like these impressionist composers who I really like.
Yeah.
And that platform helped me inform myself about them and kind of go from one connection to another, which is another thing that Spotify really discourages you from doing. Like on Adagio, you can sort by composer or year or performer or composition. Like it's very cataloged in a really constructive way. Whereas Spotify almost discourages you from even going to an artist's discography.
It is difficult to navigate. Yeah.
It's so frustrating to me. And it's like, why do you want to keep people from looking at an artist's whole discography? Like, why can't I just click on a year and know what they did that year or a decade? I mean, I'm a big jazz fan, and it's so bad for jazz because it's like often the date an album is released is not the same as when it was recorded.
Yes.
So Spotify will list the date as like 2015 when the album was first released in 1965.
Yes, I do not trust like that. That's something I deal with a lot because I take all that information and put some of that in the videos that I do. And reliability of information like that, I do not trust Spotify at all because it could be a re-release or sometimes it's not even a re-release. And I'm like, I don't know why you think this happened in, like you said, 2015 when this is clearly from the 60s. So it is its own sort of like misinformation on the platform. It's just a mistake somehow, but I don't know.
The misinformation thing is interesting because I think we see algorithmic problems with politics and with journalism in the sense of misinformation.
Yeah.
And somehow we don't connect it back to culture, even though culture is affected in the same ways. Like authorship is lost on Spotify. Like context is destroyed. You are not having a holistic understanding of what you're seeing. And yet we accept it in music or videos or cooking or whatever in a way that we are more wary of it in politics or journalism per se. It's very frustrating. But I want to ask you also, how has your iPod shaped how you consume these things? Like I just imagine rotating the wheel.
Oh,
the wheel is so
let me turn it on. If you can hear it on this mic. That's why I have these headphones. Hang on, I got to boot up the manual hard drive here. There we go. Okay, so there it is. It's on. If I can see the light, there we go.
Yeah. Composers.
Can you hear that?
Oh man, yeah, totally.
Nostalgic. So it started with. I do have a library of stuff from when I would just regularly purchase music, and that stuff is dated now, like 20 years old. So there is certain stuff that takes me right back to the situations I was in when I was listening to that. And that's because that's the stuff that's already in my iTunes library of just years and years and years. And these things, like, this is a reconditioned one, but it still syncs with iTunes and all that.
Cool.
So like plugging it in, it's immediately working, just like it would back in the day. What I'm doing for this month is I'm doing just this, and I'm sort of going anti or leaning away from the algorithm. So recommendations wise, I actually want to ask you about this because I'm asking people for what their music recommendations are, and then taking that, and then I'll buy it on iTunes the old fashioned way, and then load it on here. And then because this doesn't have any of the distraction, and it doesn't have, infinite. It's not only like infinite distractions of the internet, but like there are also other audio distractions. So I can be listening to music on here, and then, like you said, like you're doing a second thing. If I want to pull up Instagram, and then if I want to hear whatever the video is, then I got to pause it and then listen to the video. And then that might send me down a rabbit hole. And then now I've put this thing on pause.
Totally.
But this is like, okay, I'm going to listen to an album. I'm not going to, because playlists are harder on here. You have to make them yourself. And you have to have every song. So it is not as easy to do as Spotify. So this is much more like album based.
Yeah.
So with that, you mention in the book Awakening by Hiroshi Sato, which is I'm not familiar with. But you then go on a whole, I love that you then practice what you preach, and you give a whole history of the scene. and as someone who appreciates that, and many of my videos, that's what I focus on, is like, what is the context of the thing around it, and how does that sort of inform the thing? I love it. So let me ask you for a music recommendation, and you can say that one. I'm going to check that out, absolutely, and put it on here and listen to it. Do you have any other, like, if you got like one album that you would recommend?
For sure. It's hard. I mean, it's hard to pick one. The Hiroshi Sato album is like really great, I think. And to your point, it is an album. It's like perfectly composed to be like a 45-minute or whatever listening experience. One song is perfect. It's like a holistic thing in a way that albums just are not usually these days. Like it's just fantastic. And it's like this 80s city pop, which is like Japanese late 70s, early 80s music, orchestral synth horn section. It's great. It's one of my favorite albums for sure.
Okay, great.
But I was just listening to, before we started recording, this short album by Pharoah Sanders, who's a jazz musician, very like abstract saxophonist, I think.
Yeah.
And that album is called Harvest Time.
Harvest Time. Okay.
And I think it's just like two sides of vinyl or something. It's like a 20-minute track. It's only like two 20-minute sides, but there's the first track on there is called Harvest Time, and it's 20 minutes long, and it's just like ambient in the interesting way of like vibey and cool and propulsive, but also extremely interesting.
Yeah.
And like shifts and flows over time in cool ways. So I was just going back to that track and remembering how much I liked it.
Great. Well, I got multiple things to add to my iPod. Thank you. Those are great. This has been fantastic. Thank you for your time. If you have anything else to add on this, I'll give you the floor. But this has been a great and great continuation of this book. Great talking to you. So
No, I'm glad you liked it so much, and I'm particularly like the Hiroshi Sato part. I was like, okay, I'm gonna make the recommendation, and then I am gonna do all the work.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you picked up on that, because it was like structurally what I was trying to do.
Because you're saying it's devoid of all of this context and whatever, and then you go, well, here's a recommendation and here's all the context.
My editor actually cut more of the context. Like I think I had another 500 words, because he like wrote that album when he was like getting divorced and was like separated from his child. So interesting. So anyway, But yeah, I'm happy you liked it. And I am like, my next New Yorker column is about like curators online. So like people who are trying to approach things constructively and like organize the internet's culture and information. So I feel like you're engaged in doing that too. Like people do it through YouTube channels or playlists or whatever.
Yeah.
No, this is why we have to get off. Like we have to make our own little things, whether it's Patreon or newsletters or whatever, and just like try to ignore. Someone was like, I wrote a column that went up yesterday about like AI search and stuff, and someone was tweeting about it and was like, oh, the web is either going to be like indie bookstore, like quirky indie bookstore, or a garbage heap. And so you have a choice. Like you're either in the garbage heap or you are running your quirky indie bookstore.
And the garbage heap is free and ad supported. And the indie bookstore is more expensive and you have to pay directly for it. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I thought that was a great comparison because like there's a trade-off. Like in the garbage pile, you have tons of exposure and there's lots of other stuff around. In the indie bookstore, you have to know where it is and you have to pay for it.
Yeah.
But ideally, you're getting the better experience in the indie bookstore.